Leadership has always begun and ended with one word: respect. If you don't recognize the talent and the skill and the need for every individual to be productive and to contribute and to acknowledge that contribution, just the same way I need it. I want recognition. I want respect. People do things for their reasons, not for mine. People do things for their reasons, not for yours. Recognize who you're talking to and talk to them in a way that shows respect. Whether you're a leader of a business that does, $500 million a year or $500,000 a year, principles are the same. You need to listen. You need to be intuitive. I think, our success can be attributed to really one word: quality of product. We will put the donor ahead of even our relationship with the organization. There's no such thing as a victimless crime. There's just no room for it. I can't say I haven't changed, but I have broadened. I've allowed room in all of my considerations.
Cars has returned over $600 million to nonprofits. Could you talk about what makes your vehicle donation model so effective, and why do you think other organizations haven't replicated it at scale?
Sure. I hear the tone in your voice that you're dubious about the amount of money the company has returned to the community. Well, first off, we are an organization that returns 80% of the net. Most organizations that operate in our space or used to operate in their space, we've managed to move many of them out of the way. There was a period of time when this was a less reputable arena. So we've managed to clean that up. And some of the larger organizations, quite frankly, we've purchased and assimilated. But mostly, I think our success can be attributed to really one word, maybe two, I guess: quality of product. We've raised the bar. We provide, it's all homegrown software. We have our own development team. And, we do things like provide 100% transparency. So if you're one of our nonprofits, you have access to a program we call NAV, which gives you access to every number I have as its chief executive. You have access to the same amount of information, only really just about your organization. So I think providing that category of transparency has given a degree of confidence, if you will, to the chief financial officer's facility, and therefore they endorse and support there being a champion inside the organization. I think that's one thing. The other is that I think we're the only organization of our kind that provides the category of marketing support. I mean, some people will prepare this or that for you. We produce dozens of new marketing pieces, both for print, for websites, for banner ads, and so on. We've got 11 full-time people in our marketing department, and the only thing they do is test and develop. And we don't provide the same category of creative to the Northeast that we provide to the Southwest, because they're very different arenas. So we're constantly testing and providing marketing materials and communications that work. We have an agreement and an understanding. For example, let's talk about our NPR and PBS relationship with public media in this country. Again, I appreciate what goes on in the UK, because having grown up in Canada, we had the CBC. We didn't have such an issue where we had to privately support a public network. It doesn't make sense to me the way it happens in this country, but it's interesting. But we use a lot of their talent, and we're the only guys that have access to that much talent that often, that can be utilized in your, the marketing of your particular facilities. And the other thing is that we have got the momentum. I mean, we've got almost 11,000 nonprofits under contract, and we won those by, sending them more money than the next guy. I shouldn't say more money, by creating greater value. What I mean by greater value is one of our clients is St. Jude. And St. Jude has got us in a category where they consider us as sort of a top tier donor. And I once asked the lady who was our account rep for there, I said, why do you managed to take somewhere between $4.5 and $5 million a year out of our program. And that was before we added real estate. That was just the vehicle donations. And I said, why, like, for so little money, you raise $1.5 billion. Why are we considered? And the response startled me, because it's something I should have considered. And that's ROI. The cost of our money is insignificant. When you have matching programs and when you have people that are rounding up at the the supermarket and adding an extra dollar here or there, or 60 cents or whatever the change is, it's one thing. The cost of our money to them is insignificant. They don't require a lot of labor to administer it. It's mostly automated. It requires somebody to make sure that they're doing what they have to do and so on. But even if there's a problem or a complaint, they don't even have to deal with it. They just send them to us and we do it. And so what's happened over the years is we've created such a trust between ourselves and our partners, our operating partners out there. We have 500,000 to 600,000 conversations with donors a year. Well, you have to have a really, really solid relationship with your partner to allow them to deal independently with your donors. We've never had a misstep. We've never abused that privilege. We recognize that that data is not ours. It's yours. We don't sell it. We don't use it. We don't rent it. We don't mine it. We don't send a note out to them that has our name on it, other than to say that, we may be processing this. We're transparent about that as well. So I think why it works, one absolutely incredible service to the donor, period. We will put the donor ahead of even our relationship with the organization. If we feel they're doing something inappropriate with the donor, we're not afraid to call them out on it. And at the end of the day, that's the holy grail in nonprofit, is the value of your donor. We've come with one, we have a net program. And what that really means is, the simplest way to put that, you donate a car, just for the sake of easy math, for those of us who are like me and, don't really deal with the numbers well. We get a vehicle and it sells for $1,500. Let's assume that there's $500 worth of expenses in there. And what are those expenses for? Not to us. Those are like tow related, auction related, maybe minor repairs and so on. So there's $1,000 left. And we say, well, we're net. So there's $1,000 left. You get $800. We get $200. But we've shared the expenses because we don't take our percentage on the gross. Most organizations will take their percentage on the whole 2,000 and then take the expenses. So you pay 100% of the expenses. We are incentivized to keep those costs low and minimal because we ourselves are underwriting 20% of them. And so we put ourselves on the same side of the equation as you, the nonprofit. Additionally, we are a nonprofit. We are a 501c3 in this country. We understand the value of a dollar and what it means to a nonprofit to be able to generate that capital. So I think when you put it all together, we have a passionate staff, less than 2% turnover, the operating folks in 10 years. I think we won the day with a quality product, setting the bar high, living up to the commitment for customer service and donor respect, and as they say, mo money.
We're coming up on a decade in your role as CEO at Cars. When you stepped into that position 2016, what was the biggest challenge you saw and how did you start addressing it?
What was the biggest challenge? Well, the biggest challenge was I had no intention of staying here. I came for a 45 to 90-day assignment. My job was, at that time, was to replace the current chief executive, who had, I think, done a reasonable job of growing it as far as he could. Interesting fellow, but no real corporate or structural problem. And when you get to a certain point in a business, as you know, you have to move from the gut to the gauge. Business becomes intuitive at a certain point. And if you don't know how to deal with data, if you don't know how to read the numbers, if you don't know how to articulate a vision, at 4 or 5 different levels, you're not going to create the vacuum that people require in order to grow. So, when I got here, it was really just about, a smooth exit, hire a new guy, put him in, give him the keys, to the car and head on down the road. I'd had somebody already picked out that I wanted to put in the position, and I was going back to, what I was doing, and that was that. Well, I kept coming home with a smile on my face, and my wife said, "What's going on? You're like happy." I said, "What do you mean what's going on? I'm always happy." "Well, yeah, you're always happy, but you're not always so calm." I said, "Well, I really come to like the people I'm working with over there. I found a building full of, the behavior here when I arrived, the staff, I hope this is not an inappropriate expression, but the people I found here, all were behaving like battered wives, battered spouses. They were not allowed to make decisions. They were not They were very constricted and smart people, and many of them at this point had already started looking for other positions when we got here. So we sort of said, "Hey, look, give it 60 days. You don't like the direction we're going in, you're free to continue to look." And when I got to know these people, I had a tremendous amount of respect for them, and I did what I think good leaders do: assess their strengths and their weaknesses, and then sort of said, "Okay, go do. Don't let me get in the way. I'm going to be the guy that's hanging off the front of the ship, taking all the waves, but we're going that way, and that's it. Create the picture. Let them chase the vision. What else do you really need to do for good people?" And we had very few people that we had to move on down the road, and so the senior staff that were here when I got here, save one or two that we had to move on, are still here. They're doing, I don't know, 10 times, 20 times the volume. When I got here, we were doing about 30 across the top. We're now doing 100 and some, whatever, it depends on the year. So 3, 4 times the top line from, about 20,000 vehicles to, on a good year, 150,000 vehicles. On a slower year, last year was a little slower. I think this year we're going to be about 95, just under 100,000 vehicles by the end of the month, with far less stress, way more tools. So that was one. And the other was I really fell in love with the mission. What do you mean we're helping to fund all these organizations, these small, little obscure ones? And why don't we take this program really across the country? It's a good program. So we had to start from zero to build a great deal of credibility because, again, 10 years ago, there were lots of people in this industry because it was easy, low-hanging fruit. They were providing, you know, a product that I don't think was designed for as a corporate piece. And so we started to deliver on that, and we'd pitch, and it was, Perry volley. And eventually, we broke through to 1 or 2 and 3, and then it started to spread. And, the rumor was, unless you're allergic to free money, these guys are okay. And my parent is 107, 108-year-old nonprofit, with a stellar record. And, I decided I don't want to be the guy that ruins that. So we are like right up the middle of the road. And she said, why did you stay? And I said, well, they haven't asked me. And she looked at me and said, for a smart guy, you're an idiot. And I said, well, okay, maybe elaborate. And she said, I'm pretty sure if you suggest that you'd like to stay, they'd likely say yes. And so at a certain point, I came off sort of contract as an interim and said, I'm going to do this. I took a bit of a sort of southward cut in my, revenues, personal revenues. But, fortunately, we've had some previous successes, and it wasn't that important. To this very day, I think one of the most difficult, but probably one of the most rewarding decisions I've ever made. And I came from having a very strong and extreme center-right perspective on most things to, I think, now moving more to the center, and I vacillate depending on the subject between center right and center left. So I guess I've always been a fiscal conservative, but I think I could easily say at this point that I'm a pretty staunch liberal, conservative, a staunch liberal social with regard to social programs. When you meet the people that your constituents are serving, when you meet the kids at St. Jude, when you meet the patients. I just think that when you meet hunger face to face on the street, when you meet homeless people where they live, and that is our nonprofit. I mean, we raise money for our nonprofit, which serves the San Diego community by serving these other communities nationally. So when you have the opportunity to actually see what your product does, not just for your own nonprofit, but nationally, it's hard to deny, there are people out there that need help. It's that simple. Now, some of them are more challenging than others, obviously. Some of them are easier to deal with. But at the end of the day, I don't have to agree or disagree. I rarely have a comment on politics. I rarely have a comment on what a nonprofit does. We are agnostic. We serve pro-choice. We serve pro-right to life. It's not my business. We serve, pro-Israeli, not so pro-Israeli. It's not our business to determine what somebody does or doesn't do. Our job is to provide the services we provide agnostically pardon me, to any legally registered nonprofit, and we assume that the authorities police these people appropriately. If they have the right certificates, then our job is to go out and do what we do. We can't pick and choose. That would make us some kind of a political organization or some kind of a I don't know what. It's not our job. Not our job. So sometimes we have to eyes straight forward and do what we're here to do. And it's incredibly rewarding. So back to the question, what was the most difficult challenge? Well, you're going to find this one amusing, I guess, but since we're talking to a largely business-oriented group, look, one of the first things you learn as you move up the C chain is everything you do has a tax implication. Every decision you make, the last stop before you push the button is how does it impact our situation on tax? What's it going to cost us? When you walk outside in the winter months, the first thing you do is sort of, go like this, right? So when I first moved to San Diego, it probably took me a couple of years before I used to walk out the door without immediately going like this, realizing that it's nice out. Well, it's the same sort of feeling when you no longer have to consider tax as part of your decisions. And so for me, the mindset of running a nonprofit for the benefit of the community as a result. I mean, we're a community-owned organization, so what we do is for the benefit of the community. It took me a long time. That was the biggest mental struggle for me, not to have to consider the tax. I know that sounds like a minor thing, but it's sort of part of your training, part of your behavior. Other than that, I mean, the obvious challenges of business, right? Oh my God, we don't have the proper software to go where we're going to go. Looking around to try and find something. There's really nothing that does what we're doing because we're unique in that we do something that not many people do. So we set about building our own software, and that gave us the opportunity to build the things like we talked about, Nav, and tailor it to our users. How do we interact with the auction yards? I mean, where are you gonna park, stash, and liquidate 100,000 vehicles a year? And started to understand and build those relationships. And then we decided we should probably get into the auction business ourselves. So we've built and or bought a number of auctions across the country and built alliances to be able to manage all of this inventory. And so that meant, we had to build not just APIs to interact with those, but we had to build the software on our own side to make sure that we knew where our inventory was. I want to be able to provide you, the finance officer at your nonprofit, again, in Nav, where are my cars? Where's my inventory? Has it gone to the auction yet? Has it been sold? What was the price it got? Why was it not sold? Okay, because you didn't think you got enough money for it, or, all of those things. And we have to automate that. So, of course, that's been, the biggest challenge.
You kind of
I'm
touched it.
yours.
You kind of touched on it already, but we don't often get political in our conversations. But I think it's fascinating that an experience in business could change somebody's political outlook. You referenced that part of that was just in seeing the effect of what your organization is doing. How else do you think, or how do you think an experience like that within business, when you still are thinking about the numbers and the revenue and the costs and all of that, how does that, what was your experience to change your political mindset, even though it was still center, was still leaning slightly one side or the other, but any shift that comes from business is interesting to me.
Well, I don't know that it's as maybe shift is an interesting word. I think I'd really like to use the word I have broadened my perspective. I have allowed room for ideals that I might not have considered. I just didn't want to bother with or didn't need to bother. They weren't, part of the fuel I needed to achieve the things I wanted to achieve while you're building a better bottom line or building a better mousetrap or creating whatever you're doing. But it's very difficult when you're in a business that look, if I were just running the auction yard that the cars came into, I'd be busy. How do I sell more? How do I bring more people to my auctions? How do I? But when you have to go in to a large nonprofit, or even more importantly, a small nonprofit, a 3-person animal rescue, and you talk to them and you not only see how passionate they are about what it is they're doing, and there's lots of categories of people in the degree of extremes that they go to, but when you go to an organization like Helen Woodward, and you can see the animals and touch the animals and recognize what's going on out there, something that you haven't seen when you actually go into the street with one of your food vans and feed people and recognize the state of some of these people, and the situations that they're in. Not all of them have chosen to be there. Some have. When you find, immigrants, whether you agree with them coming into your country or not, is irrelevant. What's relevant is that a van has dropped them off at a local McDonald's with, two kids and, a letter to show up someday. I don't care who you are. Let's be realistic. A stray cat shows up at your door. You have a tendency to well, I would have a tendency to want to put down a little saucer full of milk, metaphorically. And so it's difficult to ignore human conditions that are in your face and not all of a sudden include in your view, some of them, they're taking advantage. Okay, that's, we call that shrinkage in retail, right? So you can't ignore the ones that do need. And so, as I say, I don't think well, I can't say I haven't changed, but I have broadened. I've allowed room in all of my considerations for things I perhaps wouldn't have considered important in the past. But, maybe maybe we spent an extra six figures on making sure that this group got taken care of or that group got taken care of, as opposed to I need to make sure it's there at the end of the calendar year or fiscal year. It becomes less important. And at the end of the day, the moral consistency still exists. Your rewards in life are in direct proportion to the amount of service you provide to your fellow man, whether that's in business or in your personal life or whatever you do. When you're of service, you attract wealth. Ask Mr. Bezos. Whether you like him or you don't, whether you like Amazon or you don't, whether it's become a drug in your household every day, the doorbell going or not, the reality is it's a terrific service. I'm out of blades. I push the button and they're there by the end of the day. And I don't have to run down to the grocery store to get them. If you're providing a service that makes people's lives better, whether it's, again, a business service or feeding or dealing with hunger or dealing with whatever. I mean, the list of nonprofits we serve, the things that they do, the services they provide are extraordinary. So that I hope that explains it. I don't know how else to explain it to you, to be honest.
No, it makes sense. I like the word broaden as well. I think it makes it's more encompassing, more inclusive, but also not
Inclusive.
it's not denying one side of the argument in order to understand the other. And I think we often think that way, that in order to get one side of a point, we have to deny another one. But broadening is like encompassing both, which I think is healthy in the world.
Well, I think that's the strength of, the human condition, right? We're fairly elastic in that we can comprehend the value of both sides. And one day you have to, I guess, you know, what's right in front of you is what you have to deal with. And if you have a bigger tool belt or a wider perspective, I think you can provide a better level of service. And that's really what we're here to do.
David, I did have a follow up on it on the leadership side of things. Did you want to go down that route?
Go for it, Becky.
Okay. So you mentioned that you had less than 2% turnover. And I'm thinking for our listeners that might not have those rates and struggle with turnover. You mentioned that when you first began, you hadn't intended on being there that long, but you essentially enjoyed it. You got on with the people, you liked the mission, you felt a connection with it. Do you think that the relationship that you all have in that workspace, was that lucky? Was it conscious and deliberate? Were there tools or processes or ideals that you put into place that made that more likely? Or do you think it was fortuitous?
Well, probably a little of all that. Is it ever any one thing? For me, leadership has always begun and ended with one word: respect. I think you have to start out by giving, respect to every individual that works with you or for your organization. Um, it begins and ends there. If you can't respect them, it's usually because they're either not doing a good job or they're not providing integrity or they don't want to learn. Whether they're doing the job or not is irrelevant. It's really whether they want to learn and change and grow. So, look, I'm a nonprofit. I probably don't pay the highest wages in the industry, but I can provide an environment for them where they can really appreciate the value of what they do and the value of the contribution. And I can reward them by giving them lifelong value, for paying for, a master's in public administration, which we need MPAs in our environment, paying for, an MBA by sending, tons of our people off to a category of executive education that they would never, ever even dream of going to, send them off to Duke, off to HBS, Stanford, to the executive ed courses, and they get a taste of that. But in addition to that, it builds their own self-esteem. It builds their ability to manage well in our environment. But it also gives them, a transportable skill, so that should they decide to leave, well, they'll go on and do well. And how does that harm me? It doesn't. They go off and they're one of, they're an alum of our organization. What can they say? Oh gosh, I got this job because I got an MBA because these guys paid for it. What can they say? We're nasty, but people are offered better opportunities or different opportunities and so on. But very few have gone. I've had a couple go, and I tell them, we're not turning off your stuff here. We're just going to put them in sort of suspense. We're not canceling your health insurance. We're not doing. You go out there and see what it's like, and you decide what you want to do. All but one. There were only three. Came back.
That says a lot.
Why? Because people are not people. I think I discovered the source of this nonsense. There we go. Okay. Bless you. Not everybody out there is responsible, management. They don't. Okay. Forgive this. This isn't about self-aggrandizement. This is simply about assessing what's going on out there and why people stay. Look, if you don't provide a dignified environment, if you don't provide opportunity to grow, if you don't recognize the talent and the skill and the need for every individual to be productive and to contribute and to acknowledge that contribution, just the same way I need it. I want recognition. I want respect. I believe that the people who work for me at various different levels to their capacity deserve the same. I don't need to be called Sir or Mr. Pearl or any of that nonsense, right? If we're working together, like any one of us can be carrying the football, on any given day. In a previous business, I remember we ended up closing a huge piece of business for that business with Johnson and Johnson at the time, because I had a receptionist who had a skill of recognizing who was on the phone by their voice. She had one of those people that could do that. And we had a gentleman call who was representing his company and said, asked to be transferred down to my office. And usually their admins would make the calls, but she, without even asking who he was, said, yes, Mr. Smith. And he said, excuse me? She said, yes, Mr. How did you know it was me? Well, I've recognized your voice. Well, I've only called you 2 or 3 times. This is, well, we believe it's important to recognize the people we do business with and so on and so on. Showed a little bit of respect to the character, and that was it. They came, inspected our warehouse, and decided they could eat off the floors, and that was that. And as you grow, you start to learn about these things, and you determine that people do things for their reasons, not for mine. People do things for their reasons, not for yours. And so I think our job is to find out what their needs are and help to provide those in the execution of their job. Do I care if they spend an extra 10 minutes standing around the water cooler talking about, the last episode of Young and Restless? It's stress relief. At the end of the day, if they complete the tasks that need to be completed and our business is running along and we're doing okay, we don't have to squeeze every single drop out of the lemon. We don't. We need to be here tomorrow, and they need to leave a little something in their tank, and they need to go home refreshed to their family. They need to go home and be able to have something left to give to their kids. I'll talk forever unless you interrupt.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts come up with
As
the
I was just
wisdom
thinking
that
that
you're
so many
sharing.
things come up.
culture is another is something that came up. That book, "Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch." I believe that's the title. And you're in the nonprofit space, and all of this sounds well and good. And I was just wondering if it would translate to the Olympics, or if it would translate to somewhere a little bit more competitive. But I'm
Yes.
not saying that as a gotcha. I'm actually saying that like I'm curious because there are different strategies. Were you gonna reply, Howard? Sorry.
Yeah, I look, I'm not saying my way's the only way. I'm saying my way works for me. My way works for my environment. And has it worked in other than nonprofit? This is my first nonprofit experience. I didn't get here because I failed my way here.
Are you sure?
And I haven't changed my management strategy since the early 80s when I was a screamer and realized that that worked for a short period of time until people started jumping off the boat.
Yeah, it's interesting too, like who are we when we finally like set foot on shore too? Like, yeah, sure, maybe our boat got there 5 minutes earlier, but it's like, can we live with ourselves at the end of the day? So it is kind of challenging and complex to come up with like a metric for success. And I think broadly speaking, it sounds like a better way to go about it. Quality of life, work-life balance, like you're framing as a leader saying these are people blowing off steam. I'll treat them with respect, values like align and empowering your people. All that sounds good. Now I'd like to touch on ethics. So you earned a Torch Award for ethics just last year. What ethical dilemmas have tested your leadership most?
Well, we're in the auto auction business. Oh my gosh. I think over the years, we've had to groom our supply chain and we've had to install ethical leaders in our auctions. And so one of the things that sets us apart, and again, when I got here, they used to offer gas cards. If you donated your car, you got a $50 gas card. Okay. One of my first acts here was to axe that crap. We're not in the cosmetic business. You don't get a gift with purchase once a year in order to incentivize you to buy my lipstick. You want to donate? You want to donate because you want a tax receipt? Research shows me that's the fourth down the list. By the time you get to number 4, it's insignificant. It doesn't matter. The reason most people donate their vehicles is because they got to get that piece of junk out of their driveway. All right. Or even better still, we don't even get a lot of junk anymore because we don't ask for junk. We ask for the good cars. We ask for the better ones and we get them. You get what you ask for. So ethically, we've had to deal with people, in the used car business, that want us to do this or that with a title or, people that buy a vehicle and don't change the title and drive through toll stations and get parking tickets and don't pay them. And the original owner gets the deal, gets the bill. And so we have to deal with a lot of low end stuff in that regard. And we've had people say, well, can I get a tax receipt for this much instead of that? And so on. We just don't. We just don't. And, to be honest, we do okay. And so if we have to go pick up a donor's vehicle and we know we're going to lose money on it, yeah, we'll go pick it up anyway. Why? We built a donor. We built a relationship with the donor. And if we have to eat a couple $100, that's fine. If it's consistent with one partner over another, then, we have to do something about it. For the most part, at the end of the year, it's not significant enough. It's a rounding error. Pardon me. So we deal with that. But I would say the most ethical challenges, other than, one or two things I found when I got here about how, people were using some certain suppliers and getting remunerated for the referral,
Yeah,
uh, and that sort of stuff, which was rampant in the industry at the time. Other than that, I find I've got a pretty decent crew here.
nice.
And we don't, that's the one thing we just absolutely categorically do not, period. We more than any, um, have to walk that center line. We just do. We're working with some of the most, I believe, significant and highly recognized organizations in the space. I can't go to my Red Cross, uh, partner and say, "Oh, gee, I'm sorry, we've had some of your money purloined." There's just no room for it, and that's the one thing that would be, cause here for absolute, immediate, instant termination. And not only that, I prosecute 100% of the time. We send a tow truck. to pick up a vehicle that you've donated. We go to your driveway to pick up your car. And the tow truck driver says, "Oh, this is really good car. Ma'am, instead of donating it, let me write you a check for $600 or $1,000, right?" And they buy the car and then they put in a note, the donor canceled it, right? Well, we every cancellation, we need to know why. The first call is to the guy he works for. The next call is, it's fraud. It's fraud. It's conversion. They've stolen our inventory, right? And so we not only demand that they're immediately terminated and so on, but we go the legal route. It ends up being a misdemeanor or something, but the fact that they're investigated and that they actually have to talk to some kind of a police official generally scares the crap out of them. So we've watched incidents of that disappear, but those are the kinds of things, there's no such thing as a victimless crime. Oh, the insurance will cover it. That's a crock. We all end up paying more for our car insurance because people do that. There's no such thing as a victimless crime. Those are the categories. We don't have any big frauds or big scandals or anything along those lines. Each of our transactions are small. There's just a lot of them. Thank God.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. With small business or business in general, there's different ways to grow, and there's this concept of innovation through acquisition, which certainly some of the larger companies do. And I saw that Cars has completed 6 M&A deals in the last 8 years. I'd like to ask you about your framework for assessing whether an acquisition aligns with your mission. Could you unpack that a little bit?
It doesn't necessarily have to align with the mission. It has to with how we operate. I think that is far more important. And what I mean by that is, we've gotten into the transportation space, and now we've moved that from a sort of a platinum level service into SaaS. We've converted some of these folks to SaaS because it was too expensive to run it, but yet it's a viable service. So most of what I've put together has aligned operationally, but it doesn't have to. Some of the things we're currently looking at are just really good business operations. And they don't necessarily have to plug into our real estate donation business. They don't have to plug into our stock donation business. They don't have to plug into our roundup, our minute to give stuff. It doesn't have to plug into the car donations. What they have to do is they have to provide, the one place they do have to align is that they have to provide an appropriate level of customer service, either to the nonprofit arena or in some way impact that. So I guess there is a certain amount of alignment. But I would buy anything. If I thought it was, obviously I'm not interested in retail. There's things I'm not interested in. But there isn't a sector I wouldn't look at if it didn't make sense. It doesn't have to, I mean, that's the beauty of software. It's the beauty of AI. It's the beauty of, of at a certain level, management's management. And so I wouldn't necessarily go into an industry that I don't understand until I hired somebody who did.
Yeah. It's a smart CEO answer. That was something I learned in business school was play to your strengths, recognize your weaknesses and address them. You're sometimes not the best person to do the thing you're not good at. I thought it made sense to become well-rounded. And so invest in things I didn't like. Like in myself, like, oh, this is a really challenging subject. I think there's a balance to be struck. I think it's good to challenge yourself and good to grow and have some appreciation for the skills of others. It can help you not judge a whale by how well it can fly, which we all kind of are guilty of in our day to day. Just kind of know what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes or appreciate just how much they can bring to the team because you've been in their seat yourself. But I think you grow far faster and smoother when each more or less plays to their strengths and complements each other.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think as a leader, our job is to be able to articulate the vision at several different levels. I don't articulate my vision for where we're headed to my board, the same way I do, when I'm talking, to the guys in the auction yards when they're, pushing a car over a stone lot, in 80-degree weather, 85-degree weather. But I do like to remind them that they're not just pushing a car over gravel. What they're doing directly impacts the fact that that night we're going to put food on a table for someone to eat. what they do directly translate to meals. In fact, I often talk to my suppliers, particularly when we're talking about pricing. Look, I can put 2,000 calories on a plate for $2, two and a quarter. Every $2 you charge me is a meal, is a daily food supplement somebody isn't getting. So how many meals are you going to charge me for this?
Hmm.
But that's the reality of it. So
Framing is very important.
yeah, but I agree with you. You've got to challenge yourself. And I think you get to a point where you begin to trust your own judgment. So you can say, I can attract somebody who will look after that for me because I can tell whether their business acumen is decent. We can also see the results. And well, then all of a sudden you know more about that industry than you ever thought you could know. And that's good too.
Becky, I'm putting my foot in the door. Go ahead.
It made me think of it. I don't know if this happened for you, David, how when you said the way you articulate the vision is different depending on who you speak to. David and I have had a discussion back and forth over the last couple of days about that exact thing. If you show up differently for different people, does that mean that there's a lack of authenticity, or does it just mean that we're addressing people where they're at? Where's the kind of level of being honest and being transparent versus being adaptive to the individuals that you have in front of you? And I think in leadership, that can sometimes be a balance that can be struck. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think you're far more integrous. I think it is a statement of integrity when you can communicate your vision in a way that the individuals you're talking to can take some ownership. I don't think there's anything devious about that.
No.
I think that our job is to say, hey, you're responsible for this bundle of pixels. You get those up on the screen. Okay. Don't worry about what the whole thing is going to look like. You do this, you do that, right? And at the end of the day, when all those pixels finally show up on your new 100-inch television, you end up with oh my God, look at this. And it is that vision that pulls people forward. Let's create it. Let's be realistic. Everything in the world only moves when there's vacuum. Nothing grows without vacuum. I mean, even the weather is vacuum. It pulls the moisture falls, things grow, and so on. And in humanity, in a human being, it's this vision that says, this is where I am. That's where I want to be. Get there if I can't imagine it in some way, shape, or form. And once I do, then it's like having a piece of something stuck in between your tooth. That tongue isn't going to rest until you either get it out or get a piece of floss in there. And so I think whether it's the tongue or the floss depends on the level. And so it's a little basic, but I think that I need to challenge my board intellectually by giving them a vision that they can understand and in the language that they understand. I can't use, with no disrespect and with no pejorative overtone, I wouldn't dare use the same vocabulary with my board that I use with the guys that work in my auction yards because they have a different lifestyle. They have a different level of education. They have a different level of understanding. I mean, my yard workers, how you doing? I'm doing good. Well, maybe you're doing well while doing good. I would talk to my board, and so on. So I think you're far more honest when you recognize um, who you're talking to and talk to them at a way that shows respect. I mean, I think you sound like you're a condescending fool. If you walk in and talk at a PhD level to a blue collar guy
Hmm.
who just really wants to know what it is you want from him,
Hmm.
and he's happy to go out there and do it. So why don't you do that? Why do you have to make him think that you're the friggin', Ayatollah? We're trying to achieve the same thing, right? We're trying to get through the day, having put some distance from where we started, and go home and say, I did good stuff today.
Hmm.
What's up? Check's going to be in the account, and let's go shopping.
It's interesting. So I work in sales coaching and training and also presentation coaching and training. And sometimes I do get pushback from people that say, this doesn't feel authentic. This doesn't feel like me. That's not how I would speak. It's not how I would frame it. And my response is nearly always probably a worse version of what you just said, a less articulate version of what you just said about there's an element of integrity that comes from not just I say what I want because that's what I want to say, but I'm speaking with another human being that thinks in a different way, that comes from a different place, and finding that connection with.
And so we're back to people do things for their
Mm.
reasons, not you. Okay. Example, your sales guy. I speak the way I speak because I need to feel like I've made myself look like I am an expert, or I am extraordinary at this, or I am whatever it is. Or, I don't feel like I'm worthy. So the way I articulate things makes you sound like you're more worthy. So people are way too self-absorbed, when they're particularly sales guys, right? It's all about how they feel, how they present, whether they closed. And I will admit, when I was, younger and starting out, those are the things that I used to do as well. Oh, I did a great presentation. We're going to get this for sure. It was amazing. The response, we were supposed to be for 20 minutes. We spent 2 hours and it was terrific. And you don't get the deal and you go, what the hell happened? You know, it was because you didn't solve their problem, because you didn't listen. It's because you misjudged who they were and you were on the stage as opposed to trying to provide a solution.
Yeah, completely with you.
And you can't start off that way. You learn those things over time and over the years. But if you're in business, whether you're a leader of a business that does, a $500 million a year or a $500,000 a year, both are the same. You need to listen. You need to be intuitive. And that doesn't mean I'm a wuss or a pushover. I think these guys will tell you, I don't suffer fools, and I don't, forgive my candor. I don't buy too much bullshit either. Part of respect is, you get what you give.
Mhm.
So if you're giving me horse pucky, we're going to the barn.
I've got a couple of quick questions to ask you, Howard, as we wrap up this fascinating conversation. What's one piece of tech or process improvement that's made an outsized impact at Cars?
I think the advent of really good dashboards, the ability to assimilate your data instead of having multiple lakes, one data lake, and be able to have a dashboard go and get and present to you. I think the ability to customize that dashboard. I know 10 people and they have 10 different dashboards working the same data, but in the way they need it, for the way they think. So I think that flexibility in how we choose to draw data, how we choose to use data, I think is been significant. I also think that, pardon me, are embracing, the AI tools are helping, automated bots, to confirm appointments and things, which, which means we can reduce our overhead, but do it in a pleasant way. We've had a segment of our audience tune the voice that we use. And then they said, well, now you have to give it a name, because now you've personified it with this particular tone of voice. So, we let we let a bunch of people, name that stuff. So I think that's really where we're going. I think anything that gives you easier access. Now, again, we have, we had a very difficult time trying to find anything off the shelf that made any sense to us at all. I mean, we just don't do, I'm not saying we're that different. I'm sure we could find industries where you change the names and the process is the same, and we're also an ISO shop. So I'm big on process, right? We really need this. I think I've really said it. I think the availability and building software that gives the availability of the tools our people need to get the information without stress, that they can be talking to one of our nonprofit partners and say, oh, well, hang on, let me just get your data and here it is, and you've got it. It also makes, I think, your client and your partners feel a degree of security. It gives them a deal of a percentage of confidence that you have all this information at your disposal, that you know what their business is and what it's doing. And it's important enough to you to be able to present this stuff in a way, that you know what you're doing. So I think that's really what it is.
After 3 decades of executive leadership, what advice would you give someone stepping into their first CEO role?
Yeah. Go to the mirror, look yourself in the eye, give yourself permission to be okay. Just give yourself permission to do what you know you can do and just move on. Too many people think they're guessing at it. And, the old adage, fake it till you make it. Know what's right. Do what's right. You will become what you think about most of the time. I think it was Earl Nightingale that coined that phrase. You will become what you think about most of the time. Think about who you want to be. Think about what you want to become. If you don't know something, go research it. Do the work. There's no shortcuts. Do the work. And as Mr. Edison said, I didn't fail 2,000 times. I just found 2,000 ways of not making a light bulb. Failure, if you learn from it, it's a great education. Don't be afraid to trip every now and again.
Sound advice. Well, thank you, Howard. It's a real pleasure gleaning a little bit of your wisdom. Where can people get in touch with you and follow what you're doing?
I'm on LinkedIn, Howard Pearl, San Diego, cars, charitable adult rides and services, not hard to find. I think it's, linkedin.com/Howard Pearl, I think, whatever the thing is on LinkedIn. So
Sure.
I don't mind. I'll give you my email address. My mail is sort of is gleaned. I try and answer most of them. Sometimes it's a little later at night, but howard.pearl@gmail is my personal email. Pardon me. So I'm okay with people using that one. I have another one for family and things, but happy to deal with that. And if you've got a legitimate question or a concern or interested in what we do, it would be my pleasure to respond. And